follow along with me closely as I read through this familiar story. Many of you know it and are well familiar with it. Story from the Gospel of John, chapter 4. Eventually he, Jesus, came to the Samaritan village of Sychar, near the field that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired from the long walk, sat wearily beside the well about noontime. Soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Please give me a drink." He was alone at the time because his disciples had gone into the village to buy some food. The woman was surprised, for Jews refused to have anything to do with the Samaritans. She said to Jesus, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink?" And Jesus replied, If you only knew the gift God has for you and who you are speaking to, you would ask me, and I would give you living water. But sir, you don't have a rope or a bucket," she said, "and this well is very deep. Where would you get this living water? And besides, do you think you're greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us this well? How can you offer better water than he and his sons and his animals enjoyed?" Jesus replied, "Anyone who drinks this water will soon become thirsty again. But those who drink the water I give will never be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life." "Oh, please, sir," the woman said, "give me this water, and I'll never be thirsty again, and I won't have to come here to get water." "Go and get your husband," Jesus told her. "I don't have a husband," the woman replied. Jesus said, "You're right. You don't have a husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and you aren't even married to the man you're living with now. You certainly spoke the truth." "Sir," the woman said, "you must be a prophet. So tell me, why is it that you Jews insist that Jerusalem is the only place of worship, while we Samaritans claim it is here at Mount Gerizim, where our ancestors worshipped?" Jesus replied, "Believe me, dear woman, the time is coming when it will no longer matter whether you worship the Father on this mountain or in Jerusalem. You Samaritans know very little about the one you worship, while we Jews know all about him, for salvation comes through the Jews. But the time is coming, indeed, it's here now, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. The Father is looking for those who will worship him that way. For God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth." The woman said, "I know the Messiah is coming, the one who is called Christ. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." And then Jesus told her, "I am the Messiah." Just then his disciples came back, and they were shocked to find him talking to a woman, but none of them had the nerve to ask, "What do you want with her?" or "Why are you talking to her?" The woman left her water jar beside the well and ran back to the village, telling everyone, "Come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could he possibly be the Messiah?" So the people came streaming from the village to see him. The other Good Samaritan. We've all heard the story of the Good Samaritan, have we not? It was a story Jesus told us of a severely injured Jewish traveler that was passed by 2 other Jewish religious important people. And they didn't stop to help this Jewish traveler that was injured because it was an inconvenience to do so. The third person that traveled by this beaten, bruised individual was a Samaritan. Samaritans were kind of half-brother enemies of the Jews. He should have been the one to pass by this injured man. The religious Jews, they should have stopped. But that's not how the story played out. The one that was moved with compassion and stopped to help that man was the least likely one. He was the Samaritan. He bandaged the Jewish man's wounds, brought him to an inn, paid for all of his accommodations and care. It was a Samaritan in that story, showing the Jews how the Jews should act. He is known as the Good Samaritan. A name that has evolved into like a metaphorical descriptor. It's been applied countless times, this Good Samaritan label, countless times to people and to organizations that do good things for others. Perhaps you've used the phrase on occasion yourself. But did you know that there is another Good Samaritan in the Bible? But this other Good Samaritan never really acquired that official title, but she was good nonetheless. And of course, it is who I'm talking about, is the Samaritan woman that we're talking of in our scripture lesson today. Anyway, some historical context here. Let's talk about Samaritans. Who are they? In a nutshell, Samaritans, it dates back to around 723 BC. The Assyrians, a powerful nation, conquered the northern kingdom of Israel, north of Jerusalem, and the capital was Samaria. The Assyrians took away many of the surviving Israelites, and in their place they imported pagan peoples. And these pagan peoples naturally intermarried with the Jews that were still there, producing kind of like half-Jews, as they called them. And these half-Jews were looked down upon by the purebreds down Jerusalem way. You know how that works, all those halfies up there. But, many years later, the Jews returned, to Jerusalem from their own exile in Babylon. We know that happened from Jerusalem up to Babylon. And when they came back, the people from the area of Samaria interacted quite negatively with those that were down in Jerusalem. Samaritans built a rival temple to the one in Jerusalem. They built it on Mount Gerizim, just south of Sychar, which the Jews later destroyed. Needless to say, they didn't like each other. They weren't happy with each other, and they didn't like to be around each other. And Jews always tried to avoid Samaria when traveling through that land. But Jesus wasn't this kind of a Jew. If you've been watching our Tuesday morning Bible study, you've seen the story portrayed out and how the disciples are all concerned. Why are we going through Samaria? And Jesus said, we have a reason to go through Samaria. There's someone I want to meet. There's someone that I want to talk to. Jesus wasn't that kind of a Jew. He wasn't going to avoid anyone. And he certainly did not think of himself as a superior race. And he never looked down on those that were otherwise seen as less than. Remember the opening text of our worship service today, verse 32 of Luke chapter 5. Jesus said, I have come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners and need to repent. That's who Jesus came for. So Jesus and the disciples are on the road. And Jesus decides, in his Jesus kind of way, Jesus being Jesus, okay? He decides not to avoid Samaria. Surprise, surprise. And it's because he wants to meet someone special. Someone that he hasn't met yet. Anyway, so it's high noon. The disciples have gone to Sychar to get some takeout, okay? They needed some food. It's hot. Jesus is thirsty. He sees a woman at Jacob's well. And this is the well that Jacob gave to Joseph many, many years before. And then the interaction takes place. The interaction, and many a sermon title has been given to this interaction by pastors throughout the years. One of those sermon titles goes like this: Jesus in the high noon sun with the shady lady. The shady lady. So let's talk about the so-called shady lady. Verse 18, for you have had 5 husbands. For you have had 5 husbands, and you aren't even married to the man you're living with now. You certainly spoke the truth, Jesus said. And I guess the prevailing truth that I've always heard, the prevailing thought, let me clarify. I guess the prevailing thought that I've always heard about the identity of this woman is that she was something like the town floozy. That's what I've always heard about the woman in this story. After all, she's obviously been around, right? I mean, this is the kind of the implication. And there's that telltale detail in there about the time of day she's coming to the well for water. What time of the day is that? Noontime. Verse 6. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired from the long walk, sat wearily beside the well about noontime. The thought has been well expressed, overexpressed within Christendom, that she came to the well at noon because she was an outcast, because she was generally rejected by her townspeople. The respectable women would have gone to the well to fetch the day's water in the cool of the morning or the evening. This is the desert we're talking about. So in the morning, early, or the late evening, the respectable women would have gone to get their water. After all, it was hard to haul big jugs of water, like on your shoulders on a stick, with big jugs hanging off of it. And to do it in the hot sun would have made it nearly unbearable. So the speculation goes that this woman would have been picked on and shunned if she went with the other women. Had she gone to the well with the popular women at those ideal times, she would have been ridiculed. So, like an animal far down the list on the food chain, she has to steal a drink from the watering pool while the other apex predators are not around. This is what she's doing according to traditional thought or popular thought. And this is unfortunate. It's unfortunate that we have thought this throughout the years, that we have assumed this throughout the years, because I think we miss a large point in this story when we assume that she is like the Liz Taylor of ancient Samaria, trading husbands like sports cars. Like I don't mean to poke on Liz, but let her lawyers deal with the dirty work of the legalities of dividing the fortunes. Just trade on those husbands. But this is the ancient Near East, okay? This isn't modern day America's society. Women just couldn't go getting divorces from men whenever they felt like it. It just wasn't a possibility. It's just not the way the world worked back then. In many ways, women were more akin to the property of men. They were ruled by men. And if women were unfaithful, then men could divorce them. And that has been the general assumption regarding this woman at the well from Samaria. That she was the floozy that men married for thrill and then divorced her when she found greener grass. That's all my Christian life. That is, I'm really embellishing here. But all my Christian life, that is how I basically heard this story told in so many words. Notice, however, that nowhere in the text does it say this. Nowhere. Not at all. Why was she divorced 5 times? We don't know. As a matter of fact, we don't even know she has ever been divorced, do we? It's not in the text. It's not in the text. Verse 16. Go and get your husband, Jesus told her. Verse 17. I don't have a husband, the woman replied. Jesus said, you're right. You don't have a husband. There it is. Popular teaching has interpreted Jesus' statement here as like one of those, I gotcha moments, right? This is what this popular teaching has said. Ha ha, shame, shame. Everyone knows your name. And the popular interpretation goes on to color in the details. And the details that are colored in is she is a pathetic sinner that has no hope in life but Jesus. Has anybody heard any different? No. We never have. And we all are pathetic. So thank you, Brenda. We can admit that. But this is as how it is often portrayed, and it's portrayed as Jesus is pointing out her great sin in this sort of condescending way. Oh, that's right. Now, right. You don't have a husband now, do you? Huh. Like he's one of the supposed women, like he's like one of those supposed women who would normally be at the well in the morning or the evening. And if she were to show up at those times, there would be this chorus of mean girls, and they'd say something like, hey, hussy, where's your husband? This is what they'd say. Let's just be honest here. Oh, that's right. Your husband isn't with you. You've had 5, and now you're shacking up again. And the woman would have no recourse, but could only hang her head in shame. And this whole scene here, as it has been portrayed through the years, sounds like a scene from some 1950s movie with the popular jocks making fun of the greasers. Does it not? This is the model. How we love to read our modern culture into the Bible. We take our modern ideas and our modern culture and we read them back into the stories of the Bible, and we say, I understand what's going on because, of our modern way that we do things now. Here's my question. When did Jesus ever talk down to anybody? Never. Remember when they brought Jesus, the story of the woman caught in adultery? Remember that one? What happened? Remember what Jesus said to her? They hauled this woman in front of Jesus, caught in adultery. And Jesus said to her, "Woman, where are your accusers?" "Nowhere," she said. "Well, neither do I accuse you." That's Jesus. That's the kind of person that Jesus was. What if, instead of being the tramp that we have been led to believe that she is, what if this Samaritan woman, what if all 5 of her previous husbands died? Isn't that a possibility? Isn't that a strong possibility? Entirely possible, especially in those days. What if they all died? What if some of them were unfaithful to her and just disposed of her? Happened all the time. This is not something that would be unusual. As I said, women were unfortunately like the property of men in many ways back in those days. Well, you may say, well, yeah, Pastor Chris, but she's living with a man now that is not her husband. There is the smoking gun. There it is. Well, I'll tell you this. If she had no sons, or no sons that would even give her the time of day, or at least willing to help her, she would have very few options for survival. Very few. Remember, this is thousands of years ago in the ancient Near East. This is not modern liberated women America. Okay? She just can't go out and get a CEO job, or work her way up the corporate ladder. It's not going to happen. She had very few options if she had no support. Very few options for her survival. Begging would have been one of them. That would have been an option for her. What if this last man that she's living with wouldn't marry her? But she still has to survive. Really, looking at this differently is quite easy when we get away from the old assumptions that we've always had. And what happens is when we look at this differently, rather than seeing her as some 10 cents a dance woman devouring men as she pleases, rather than seeing her like that, maybe she's the one who has been devoured by the system in place. Maybe she's that one. Maybe she's come up empty time and time again. And now she's perhaps at the lowest point in her life, but she's a survivor. And she's surviving. And she's finding a way to do it. If this was the case, if something like this were to happen, if she were to have lost all her husbands, or her husbands cheated on her or divorced her for whatever reason, if that was the case, the people of her day would have likely seen her as cursed by God. That's how they would have looked at her. If they weren't looking at her like she was, the floozy, and they looking at her like she had just come into such unfortunate times where she had lost her husbands or they divorced her, they would have said that woman is cursed by God. That's what they would have said. Because all of the bad fortune that has come upon her, she would have been a woman thought to be cursed by God. And that's important for the story. That's very important for this story. It actually fits really well in this narrative. So, what do we do now? what do we do now? You know, a woman cursed by God, maybe her duties in the morning and the evening caused her to miss that nice time to go get water at the well. We don't know. We're just assuming she goes at midday because she's ridiculed. We don't know that. Maybe she had obligations in the morning and the evening, and the only time that she could go to the well was midday. We don't know. But what we do know is this. When spoken to by Jesus, which was a cultural no-no, men just didn't go up and talk to women. We do that nowadays. That's acceptable nowadays. But back in the day, even back in a couple of generations ago, that really wasn't, something that men would do. But way back 2,000 years ago, that was a no-no. Jesus would not have normally just gone up to talk to a woman at the well. That would have been socially unacceptable. But then Jesus didn't really fit into social acceptable norms, now did he? So Jesus goes and speaks to her, and here's an interesting thing. Instead of acting like a shamed, a beaten down, a socially rejected person, she acts very boldly in conversation with Jesus. Take a look at verse 10. Tell me what you think about this. Verse 10. Jesus replied, "If you only knew the gift God has for you and who you're speaking to, you would ask me, and I would give you living water." And the woman was very quick. The woman was very quick to respond and to reply. She's like, "Okay, well, with what bucket and rope are you going to give me this living water? The well is very deep." And living water, living water meant to them that water was coming up from the ground like spring water, like well water. It wasn't water that was held in a cistern, like rainwater that was gathered in a cistern, and that would have been like, semi-stagnant water, or at least foul tasting. But the living water is the water that came up from the ground. And so she knew what Jesus meant. The living water was down the well. But Jesus had a second meaning, of course, with that living water. But she's like, "Where's your bucket and a rope? This well is deep. How are you going to give me this living water?" Verse 12. "And besides," and here it is, do you think you're greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us this well? How can you offer better water than he and his sons and his animals enjoyed?" This woman is proud of her roots and her lineage and her tradition. And this is a strong reply to Jesus, whom she shouldn't even be addressing anyway. She shouldn't even be talking to him, let alone having these kind of bold replies. Does this sound like some poor, pathetic lady of ill repute? No. She sounds rather strong, like Survivor strong. Someone worthy of Jesus approaching out in broad daylight against all cultural norms. This is how she sounds. And she goes on, verse 20. Let's take a look at verse 20. "So tell me, why is it that you Jews insist that Jerusalem is the only place of worship, while we Samaritans claim it to be here on Mount Gerizim, where our ancestors worshipped?" This is hardly the concern of some shady lady. Hardly the concern. And Jesus says to her, verse 23, "But the time is coming, indeed it's here now, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. The Father is looking for those who will worship him that way. For God is spirit, so those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth." And the woman said, verse 25, "I know the Messiah is coming, the one who is called Christ. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." And again, certainly not someone who thinks of herself outside of God, or outside or unworthy of God's intervention. She sees herself clearly as part of the plan. Cursed by God, maybe, like everyone said. Yeah, maybe that's what they label her as, but never giving up. And I know my interpretations of this are speculative for sure, but they're certainly plausible. And what I'm trying to point out is that our old assumptions about this text are not necessarily right at all. As a matter of fact, in my opinion, I think they make much less sense than the situation that I'm presenting to you right now. So what's going on here? How can we have different interpretations? Well, there are rules of biblical interpretation that we must follow as teachers of the Bible. The three most important things in biblical interpretation, the three most important things, listen to me now, the three things that are most important when you're interpreting the Bible are number one, context, number two, context, and number three, context. The three most important rules and aspects of biblical interpretation. What is context? Context is basically what is going on. What is going on in and around the text? Where is this story seated in life? The stories of the Bible, they're not random. They're not these random blurbs floating in space and they just kind of wind up where they are randomly and haphazardly. These occurred in time and space and culture. So contextually, this is in the book of John, this story. It's in the book of John, the fourth gospel. The fourth gospel of John was written much later than the three earlier gospels, and it was written much more intentionally than the earlier three gospels. As in, the structure of the gospel of John, how it was structured in its writing, is intentional. It has a purpose. The structure even says something. Not just the words and the stories, but how it is structured. It means something. It is meaning. It is meant to say something. Well, then the next question would be, what is this story meant to say? Well, if we look at the context of it, it comes right after another story. This story comes right after another, and that is very important. That's called context. It comes right after another story. This is John chapter 4. Right before it is John chapter 3. What happened in John chapter 3? We all know this. In John chapter 3, there was a man named Nicodemus. He was a highly esteemed Jewish religious leader, the absolute pinnacle of society. He is the apex predator, if you will. He's the top of the chain. And he would have been viewed not as cursed by God, but as extremely blessed by God, because he's powerful, he has religious authority, and he's doggone rich. Okay, he would have been looked at like there is the picture of God's blessing, not God's curse. He came to Jesus. When did Nicodemus come to Jesus? You know this. At night. Very important. Very, very important. So the superstar of the Jewish faith comes to Jesus at night. When did the woman of the well talk to Jesus? High noon. What's at high noon? Bright sunlight. Bright, blindingly brilliant light. Nicodemus, when he came to sneak around and talk to Jesus at nighttime, he didn't get it, did he? No. He was in the dark, literally and figuratively. Both literally in the nighttime dark and figuratively, he didn't get it. And Jesus said to him, "You're a teacher of the law and you don't get this?" The woman at the well was fully enlightened. You see where I'm going with this? You see the structure? It's important. It's very important. She was enlightened. Literally, she's in the broad daylight, and figuratively inside of her mind and her heart. In other words, she got it. Verse 28. You want to see how much she got it? The woman left her water jar beside the well and ran back to the village, telling everyone. Verse 29. "Come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could he possibly be the Messiah?" What did Nicodemus do? Shrunk back into the shadows, didn't he? But this cursed woman, she went out and told the world, where Nicodemus slid back into the night. The woman who is considered to be cursed and judged by God became the first person to publicly proclaim Jesus as Messiah. Nicodemus, who would have been looked on as being ultra blessed by God and blameless, said nothing. So Jesus said to Nicodemus in John chapter 3, going back there, I don't know, do we have John chapter 3 there? Probably not. That's okay. Jesus said to Nicodemus, he said this, "There is no judgment against anyone who believes in him," Jesus. But anyone who does not believe has already been judged for not believing in God's one and only Son. You see the judgment theme there? Who's being judged by God? Everyone thought the woman was being judged by God, and Nicodemus was ultra blessed by God. But that's not the case. And the judgment, Jesus said, is based on this fact. God's light came into the world, but people loved the darkness so much that they did not see the light. See the relationship? Who saw the light? The one who is standing in high noon with light all around. The symbolism is blatantly clear. The woman was not afraid of the light. And that's why her story has her at the well at high noon. Is the story and the setting matters. And that's why Nicodemus was hiding in the shadows. Again, verse 28 of our text today. The woman left her water jar beside the well and ran back to the village, telling everyone, "Come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could he possibly be the Messiah?" You see what she did? Like the disciples, she left everything. This is her life source, this water. She left the jugs at the well and did not care about them, just like the disciples dropped the nets and everything that they were doing to follow Jesus. She did the same thing. And look at how the people responded to her message, verse 30. So the people came streaming from the village to see them. Hardly the response the people would have had to some town tramp. Hardly the response. They would have been like, huh, here she goes again. Here she is. Oh, just blow her off, close the window and door, don't listen. Apparently she had a lot of friends. Apparently she had a lot of influence. Quite different. Verse 14. Jesus said, "But those who drink the water I give will never be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life." Verse 15, "Please, sir," the woman said, "give me this water, and then I'll never be thirsty again." Do you think she sounds like she doesn't deserve something like this? No, she wants it. Far from being a disreputable person, I think the woman is strong. I think she's a survivor. I think she has triumphed over difficult circumstances, and now she has met the Savior. And her life will never, ever be the same again. Because as Jesus said one time in a Sermon on a Mount, he said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." He said, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." He said, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Hers, this Samaritan woman, hers is the kingdom of heaven. Is yours. Is yours the kingdom of heaven? Could you stand with me for our final hymn today? 492.